My name is AJ Riedel, and you're listening to the Thriving Through podcast, the podcast where each week I have a real conversation with self-employed consultants about what it really takes to build a profitable, sustainable, and fulfilling consulting practice. I have a question for you. Are you tired of working with clients who are too small to see real impact from your work? Or are you struggling to command the rates you deserve for your expertise? Mark Scrimenti is here to talk about how he answered that question. Mark is a fractional chief operating officer and executive coach, known for helping 5 million to 50 million business-to-business professional services companies transition from founder-driven to leadership team growth. With 17 plus years of experience in operations and scaling business, he's helped founder-led companies achieve sustainable, systematic growth through structured processes and frameworks. If you want to discover how to evolve from taking any client who will pay to building a premium practice with ideal clients, you won't want to miss this episode. Please welcome Mark Scrimenti. Today, my guest is Mark Scrimenti. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, AJ. I'm happy to be here.
So I have a couple of questions that I ask every podcast guest to kind of set the stage. What was your path to becoming a self-employed consultant?
A great question. And like any story, there's a million ways to tell it. That would all be true and true to the facts, but I'll try and cut to the chase and be brief with it. I was in operations and e-commerce for 12 years at one company. We grew a lot during that time. We grew over $100 million in that span. And that's really where I became an operations person. Before that, I was in marketing. And there's a lot that went into that story that we could maybe talk about later. But after 12 years, we had hit a certain growth mark, and the company strategy was going in a different direction. It was really time for me to go. I was always looking for what's next, looking for growth, very growth minded, and challenge oriented, not really looking to coast. So we parted ways, and I had a couple interim roles before the pandemic hit. And I was looking at EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, as a framework. I had read all the books and taken the Colby test and some of their online exercises and trainings. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm an integrator. Like I didn't know that's what I was, but that's what I've been doing the last 12 plus years. And I was doing that in preparation for a job, a COO position that had come up in an EOS shop. And it was a prolonged interview process down to being one other person. And when that just evaporated during the pandemic hit, and they didn't hire and ghosted me. I'm like, okay, well, I've been on my own before. I had my own digital marketing agency for a few years before the commerce company, and I'm like, let's give it another try. Remote work became possible at that time, or more possible, and so I hung up a shingle and I found my first few clients, and it was sort of opportunity, circumstance. Um, I had learned so much. I feel like, I've got a lot to offer. Let's see how that plays in the marketplace, and that's really how it got started. It was a little bit, let's just see what we can do, and that was 5 years ago, and I've been at it for 5 years now.
Okay, so you started out, you hung out your shingle, and you started out with 3 clients. How did you find those first 3 clients?
Yeah, well, it wasn't all at once. The first client I found was local, through a local networking group, and it was a social enterprise related to soccer. It was a really cool concept where we were creating these little mini soccer pitches and putting them on empty corner lots in urban areas, underserved urban areas. There's a whole soccer philosophy behind it, developing talent in underserved markets. It was a big part of it. And we were working with developers who own property but hadn't built on it yet. And so they were sponsoring this. It was a great concept. But anyway, I found this person through local networking, and it was my first fractional gig. So I kind of did whatever he asked me to do, like whatever he didn't want to do, essentially. The founder CEO, he had a full-time job too, so this was his labor of love, and it was half-time for me. So I was doing everything from uh, payroll, and accounting and insurance to more of the stuff that I'm used to doing, the day-to-day operations, marketing, go-to-market strategies, preparing decks, talking to potential investors, that sort of thing. And then so that was my first fractional client. Another thing that I do is coaching, and that got started when an old employee, a former employee from the e-commerce company, came to me about 10 years after he had left the company and started his own business, saying, "Hey, I admired your leadership from afar." And he's like, first of all, he's like, "Do you remember me?" I'm like, "Of course I remember you." It wasn't that big of a company. It's about 120 people. But he was just starting out. It was his first job out of college. And I'm like, "Yeah, I remember you. You were great." And he had done really well and built up his own brand strategy company. And he said, "Do you do any coaching?" And I said, "Well, I've been thinking about that, and people have encouraged me to do that. Let's give it a try." And that was we've been together for 3.5 years now, and it's been great. I mean, his business has really transformed and grown, and he's gone from not sure if I want to continue doing this to really having the best time of his life, taking a sabbatical and making more money than before, selling bigger packages, getting seats at bigger tables, and I'm really really proud of him, and it's a real joy working with him. And so that was the start of my coaching career, or my coaching, source of revenue. So it's more of a portfolio career for me at this point. And I have other clients, and I've had other clients since then, who do one-on-one coaching. These are founder CEOs, typically younger, who need help with everything from strategy to how to talk to people, um, and how to sell, things like that. So
Who
did
who
I answer your
is your
question? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Who is your ideal client?
My ideal client is $5 to $50 million in revenue, B2B professional services. I've worked a lot with creative services, so digital marketing, brand strategy, also e-commerce, SEO. Um, what else? Yeah, in that space, creative services, essentially design, and then also law offices, and software as a service, and having a background in e-commerce. E-commerce is also um, an ideal client for me. The 5 to 50 million is rough. It depends a little bit on the industry, but I found that early on, I took on whoever I could get. And
Mhm.
that's pretty typical. And usually they were a little too small. And if they're too small, you run into some issues. First of all, it just takes longer to get things done. You're expensive for them. And I always want to make an impact. I want my impact to be greater than my invoice. And with operations, it's more of an investment. You're not necessarily going to see an immediate return. So all they see is this big, check they're writing every month. And it's like, also a slower build, and you have less leverage to work with when you're small. So it takes longer to see the results that you're looking for. So anyway, 5 to 50 million is good. 10 or 20 people minimum to 250 or so. And these are companies founder led that are looking to grow, and they're really looking to scale at this point. So they've got product market fit, that's taken care of. They've got profitability, they've got a team, but the founder is usually still doing way too much by themselves. They're not delegating, or for lots of different reasons. Potentially, maybe they don't trust that they have the right people, maybe they don't have the right people, they have a hard time letting go, they're used to doing it a certain way, all those things. And so I come in and create some order, some structure, and really help facilitate that transition from founder-driven growth to leadership team-driven growth, which requires a number of things, including a strategic roadmap and a solid org structure that mirrors your business model and sets you up for where you want to go. Goal setting mechanisms, OKRs, a number of things, cadences, regular meeting cadences where you're talking to each other on a regular basis, purposefully, to solve problems and stay aligned and so forth.
Okay, all the things the founder didn't do when he was building his business or
Right,
her
like this,
business.
him or her, whatever got them there, isn't going to get them where they want to go next. And that's the difference between the businesses that stall out at 1 million or 2 million or maybe even 5 million, and the ones that go beyond that. It's a certain degree of structure, systems, processes, standardization, repeatability, modularization, templatization. Just it needs to be repeatable. That's where you start to see greater margins, and something that you can pass off to somebody else and have them do it. And there's a playbook for them, to do it, so they're not just figuring it out or reinventing the wheel.
Got it. Sounds like a lot like what I do with my clients.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Yeah.
So tell me a story or two about, excuse me, the biggest challenges you've faced building your practice and how you've overcome them.
Yeah. So a lot of challenges, and it's work in progress. So mastery to me is a lifetime endeavor, pursuit, and certainly I'm still pursuing it. But in terms of the progress I've made and the evolution I've had, I think early on, it was not really having a clear idea of who my ideal client was. And again, you sort of take what you can get. Hey, I need some, I don't have a huge runway here. I need some cash. And then you end up, perhaps it's not the best fit in terms of personality. So I mean, as a COO, for example, I'm the trusted, I need to be the trusted partner of the CEO. And if we don't click, or if they don't, we can't build that trusting rapport, it's not going to work. That's one thing. Mission alignment and values alignment is really important. So I've figured that out. Again, as I was mentioning earlier, I think size and maturity of the company matters. So I've started to go more upmarket, and part of that is it's confidence. It's experience, it's reps, it's repetition, and it's reaching. It's figuring out how to reach those higher level companies, or those bigger companies. The bigger they are, the fewer that they are, and the harder they are to reach. So how do you get in front of them? And so that's another challenge. First of all, it's figuring out who your ideal client is. I think the second piece of that, or the flip side of that, is, well, what is my offering? Like, what am I actually selling? And that's a huge thing, because as an operations person, like, well, I know I'm good at operations, and I know I can go in and I feel confident that I can help just about anybody. But so what? What does that mean to somebody who doesn't know me, who this is their business, this is their baby, and they're really entrusting me at a significant cost to help them. They don't know anything about me. So they want to know a little bit more about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And so, like, you are always selling yourself, but I think it helps to have a system that you're selling, that's more predictable. There's a little bit of that cobbler's kids syndrome here, where I know, this is the advice that I would give a business. Like, you need to create standardization. Well, I need to do that myself, and it's the last thing to happen typically. So I have, over time, built my own framework, and I've also licensed a framework that I use called System and Soul that I really like. I could talk about that too. But and then I use other tools too. I'm framework agnostic and very flexible, and I think it's helpful to be flexible. I don't like too rigid, but just to have some set, and have a service ladder. Have different offerings for different situations or size companies. Like developing that kind of sophistication took time. Like, to even know that I needed to do something like that. In other words, a do-it-yourself option, a do-with-you option, a do-for-you option, or lately I've been getting into AI and building interfaces so that I can have some productized services. And here again, this is something that I'm always encouraging people to do, my clients, business to business services, professional services businesses, to do if they can. So all that to say, getting back to your question, the challenge is, I think, figuring out who my ideal client is, the ICP, ideal client profile, what it is I'm selling, and coming up with various packages, figuring out how to price it, for example, and then really getting in front of my target clients, these ideal clients, and where do you find them, and how do you meet them, and how do you get to talk to them? And so that has been a combination of networking. To start out with, I was networking a lot, but I didn't really know why I was networking, or who I was looking to meet. And then so it kind of all goes together, and there's a little bit of chicken or the egg thing here. But fine, or catch 22. But finally, once you've realized, okay, these are the people I need to meet, it's like, well, how do I get in front of them? And seeking one-to-many speaking opportunities is one thing. So presentations, um, and they don't come easy because everybody wants to do that. Everybody's looking to reach these same people, and so
Mhm.
you have to work at it. And then if you're presenting, what are you presenting about? I could talk about a lot of different things. So I don't know, I've been talking a lot. I want to give chance for you to ask me questions. I don't know if I've answered your question, but those are some of the obstacles that and it's an ongoing challenge to just getting better at it, and learning how to do it more
Continuous.
efficiently.
Yeah, like you said, mastery takes time.
Right, continuous improvement, I think. Yeah,
Yes.
learning.
So you actually covered some of the questions that I had for you. Um, you talked about early on, you took whatever you could get. And
Mhm.
there are many consultants that have that frame of mind. I got to take whatever I can get. What advice would you give them about when and how to start saying no?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, if you're desperate for cash, um, it's hard to say no. But I think if it's a toxic client, or an abusive client, or just a client that like, this is going to be miserable, and you kind of get that sense. Um, and hopefully that's rare, but that does happen sometimes. I would say no, if you can afford to do it. I think another thing that can happen for people working uh, for themselves, and whether it's fractional or they're consultants, and I know this is true for me, is that you end up working a lot more than what they're paying you for, because you want to do a good job, and you need the business, and presumably you have integrity, and you just, it's part of who you are. But I had to kind of really teach myself, like, no, I put in enough work. In fact, the work that I've done is sufficient. And as much as I would like to do more, I'm not getting paid for that. And so that's perhaps another conversation, that you can have with the client, but limiting your own time, and learning to say no, perhaps when they call and say, can you do this for me? It's like, well, or maybe the conversation, I could do that for you, but that's outside the scope of what we agreed to do. So, we'd have to come up with another arrangement. I'd be happy to do that if you're willing to do that. And, you know, so learning to say no, learning to set boundaries, and maintain boundaries, not only, with other people, but with yourself.
Mhm.
And I think saying no, if it's outside of your wheelhouse, or sort of like outside of where you want to go with your career, like, there are times I've taken project work too. It's like, this is not really what I do, but I need the cash, and I will do that if I think I might learn something valuable. and or it will open other doors. So there are reasons to do that. Um, Especially if it's a referral from somebody who might potentially refer more business to you in the future, or if it's a client who, if you do a great job and earn their trust, might hire you to do more of what you actually want to do. I've done that before, and I've also acquired new skills that way. So, I did a compensation thing for it was a Series B funded startup, $40 million in funding, and a global company based in London, and they were growing like weeds. I think doubled in size from like 250 to 500 in a matter of 3, 4 months, and they had no compensation strategy or structure whatsoever. And I had done all my hiring and done all the compensation for the e-commerce company, and so I knew how to do that, and I had a philosophy, and I ended up doing that for them, and we built a nice infrastructure for them in a relatively short period of time. This was with a partner, so um, it's not really what I set out to do, but it's led to other work. So
Mhm.
and
So it sounds like you will take things that are little not in your wheelhouse or not necessarily your core, but you have very strategic reasons for taking those projects. Like you
right.
can learn something, you can expand your portfolio, it could lead to a bigger referral. And
Hmm.
there are reasons for doing that. I want to go
Right.
back for a moment to when you talked about you said a really important line, and I want to know how it felt the first time you did it. The line was you have a client coming asking you to do something that's outside the scope of the project. And
Hmm.
you say, this is outside the scope of the project. I'd be happy to do it, but we have to talk about, we've got to, I've got to be compensated essentially.
Hmm.
So the first time you said that, did you kind of gulp and go, eh? I mean, how did you feel the first time I mean,
Yes.
that's a very hard sentence to say the
Right.
first time. How did you get comfortable with
Yeah.
being assertive?
Yeah. That's a great question. Well, I think in reality, I think what happened was I had put in the extra time already. The first time I had to have this kind of conversation, I had put in some extra time, and I was expecting to eat it because sometimes you just do, um, especially if you don't ask in advance. But I brought it up. I said, look, I just want to let you know, given and it was early on in the project, and like the first month, first few weeks, I said, I've already put in significantly more time in the first couple of weeks than what we had, budgeted. Um, and I'm willing to eat that, but I want to let you know it. Like going forward, I think that either this project is going to require more time on a weekly basis, and or if I go over the scheduled hours, I would like to be compensated at this rate, per hour. And not only did the person agree to that, but they paid me for my time that I had already spent. And
Wow,
and that
that's
was,
nice.
yeah, it was really nice. It was kind, and it was generous, and it was you know, it was a decent thing to do. They didn't have to do that. And not everybody would do that. And I would have, like I said, I would have accepted it. And so that was the first time I did it. And it was, yeah, I think I had to figure out how am I going to broach this subject? And for me it was just being honest and being vulnerable, and especially early on. Well, you want to seem polished and professional, and it seems like, oops, I made a mistake, and now I'm begging for money, or or whatever it may be the situation is. But I think if you do it with integrity um, and honesty, it usually works. I mean, especially with the kinds, if you're working with a kind of client that you want to be working with, they'll understand. And maybe they won't be able to pay you, but at least you've had the conversation and set the stage for the future. And I think it's a good thing to do. And so from now on, I just bake that into my contracts too. It's like, like this is the scope. I've learned how to define Because with fractional, it's like I'm working 1 day a week. Well, what does 1 day a week mean? Is it every Monday, from 9 to 5? No, it's spread out throughout the week. Okay, well, how are we going to do that? Well, it's going to be based on your schedule and my availability and what's needed and so forth. Well, what if I need something? That's fine. We can work that out. And so it ends up being a certain number of hours, per month, averaged across the week. And then, there's a rate, like an hourly rate, breaking that into an hourly rate for anything that goes beyond that. And there's
Nothing beyond.
flexibility too. I'm not going to nickel and dime people, but on the other hand, you don't want to go the other direction either, and spend way more of your time that's getting uncompensated, which I did more of in the beginning.
Yeah, I did too when in my first days. What I ended up feeling was resentful,
Hmm.
and that affected
Exactly.
my performance.
Right. Right.
Not
It's a
not
vicious circle.
consciously. I mean, I didn't sit there and say, well, I'm going to do sucky work because because I'm working more hours, when it was my problem, I was the cause of the problem, but it did
Exactly.
affect my performance. So it's
Absolutely.
much better for our clients for us to set those boundaries and say, I mean, we all deserve to be generously compensated for what we do.
Hmm. Hmm.
And but often there's a little voice in our head that says, don't rock the boat, or don't ask for more, or they're not
Right.
going to be able to pay more, or
Right.
whatever assumption that
Right.
that little voice in your head makes.
Yeah.
And you know I love your story, because you had the best possible outcome when you confronted that client. I mean, because not only did they agree going forward, but they paid you, which to me that says that kind of brings up another topic. Is you, because you are a fractional COO, you have to, and you mentioned it earlier, you have to have a really trusting relationship with the other C-suite members and with the
Right.
founder. So how do you, first of all, how do you qualify a prospect to make sure that you've got that sort of chemistry, that trust?
Hmm.
And then how do you build on that trust? That's
Yeah,
two
that
separate questions, but
was a great question. And I had a thought about pricing too, but we could talk about that if you want later. I think, yeah, trust is a process, and you never really know in the beginning what you're getting. I mean, you can you can ask a bunch of questions, you can ask the right questions, and you'll get some feedback, you get some information, but it will never be complete. It'll be partial information, and sometimes, especially early on, I would meet somebody and think, oh, I, we've got good rapport. Usually starts out with good rapport. I could work with this person. This seems like somebody who's knows what they're doing, and I like their vision. I think that's usually how it starts. Like, great vision. I'd love to help you bring that to life. I have all kinds of ideas how I could help. And then I think early on, then you realize along the way that there's certain things that problems in communication. For example, people will say like, I want you to tell me the truth. I want you to be honest with me. I don't want yes people. It's like, okay. And then when that actually happens, they don't want to hear it. That has happened too, or they're very defensive, or angry, or dismissive. And if that's the case, that's kind of a red flag. It's like, I can't help you help yourself. You know, I can try, but it's like you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, that kind of thing. And so I think I've gotten, and sometimes I think early on that's led to, like, like this relationship can only go so far. Like in this, I'm only gonna be able to help you so far. I may not even be able to help you anymore because you're not you're not coachable, you're not counselable, and that's really why you hired me, and that's really what you need in this role, and that's what you said you wanted. But but it may not actually be what you want, or you may not be ready. It may be, like a maturity, like an emotional maturity issue or a self-awareness issue, or, they haven't done the work, so to speak, to really be able to handle, honest, difficult conversation, because you need to be able to you need to step in that uncomfortable zone if you want to grow personally, but also as a company, because you're going to have to change. You're going to have to change your behavior, and behavioral change is hard, and it requires some hard conversations. And if you're not up for that, you may not be successful. So then, after having done that a few times, and learn from the past too, I think it's a little bit. It's always a field thing. You talk to somebody, and again, you have a few conversations, and you ask questions. You get a sense, like, um, you know, their personality, and maybe probe a little bit, up front, ask questions up front, see how vulnerable are they going to be, how forthcoming are they going to be, how direct can I be, and there's a little bit of adaptation to it. It's like, okay, well, this person is all the different profiles in Myers-Briggs or whatever it may be. This person likes this type of style of communication. I'll adapt. I try to anyway, but it's a learning process. And I did have a client once where I had to deliver some hard truths to him, and I don't think he liked hearing it, but he respected me, and he acknowledged that. He said, "Look, you're the only person who's ever, you know, said these things to me, and I really appreciate that." And, you know, in the long term, I don't think it was a great fit, but at least we had that conversation. And so, um, I think for me, up front, I'm doing more probing, to kind of see, to weed out people I think I might not be able to work with. And that's sort of a luxury you acquire over time when you can pick and choose your clients. Again, it
Mhm.
goes back to, like, when you say no, or to a client or an opportunity. And a lot of it has to do with cash flow, I think. Can you afford to do that? And if you can, then it's more looking for, like, it's personality match, it's values alignment, it's mission alignment. Like, what is your business doing? That says a lot about the person. Talking to the people on their team, what are they like? What do they say about that person? If you're in a team meeting with them, how do they treat other people in the company? And that's a really good way to get a sense of, the vibe, and what it's going to be like to work with this person. And so I think those are some of the ways that I vet potential clients, meet with their team in advance. That's a good way to figure out whether it's going to be a productive relationship.
Okay. When we talked earlier, you called business development your least favorite thing to do,
Yes.
which I think every consultant listening just nodded their head. So, how
Right.
do you force yourself to do it anyway?
Yeah, that's another good question. Um, it's like work. It's like going to the gym. It's like, you don't, you know, some people enjoy going to the gym, I guess, but it's often you wake up in the morning, you don't want to go, and you do it anyway, and then you go and you feel better for having done it. That's how I
Mhm.
feel about going to networking meetings typically, um, and doing business development. Still, I don't think I'm great at it, but I feel like I'm getting better at it. Again, it's practice. I think, you know, getting a chance to speak in front of people, and getting practice doing that in front of uh, an audience, multiple people who might be clients, or in a position to refer you, is good, because you just get practice talking about yourself, and what you do. And then if you really engage and you're thinking about, how can I help this person, that really, I think that was an early insight for me, like, a change in mindset about what sales is all about. Because I'm one of these people who grew up, was like, I don't want to talk to a salesman. And I think a lot of people feel that way, or a salesperson. It's just like, go
Yeah,
away.
yeah. I don't want to be too salesy.
Yeah, and so I don't
Yeah.
want to be salesy myself, and I don't like being salesy, and I don't like talking about myself. I don't like talking. Do I have to toot my own horn? I don't like to do that. You know, I want my own, um, you know, qualifications to stand on their own or whatever. It's like no, everybody has to sell. Everybody has to sell. It's required, but it doesn't have to be what you think it might be. And it's more like how it's listening and learning. How could I help this person? Really, if you think about it from a more service or servant standpoint, like it makes it a lot easier. And because honestly, that's what I want anyway, and that's what we're doing anyway. Ideally, yes, we need to make money, and that's sort of the tricky part, like synthesizing those two realities. I want to help, and when it's a good relationship, I love what I'm doing and I love this work. And I also it's how I make a living, so I need to get paid for it. But if you approach it, I think first with the service orientation and how can I help this person and really listening for those opportunities and really applying everything that you've learned, like this, I could help this way, I could help that way. It makes the sales process a lot easier. And I have found that this, I think, may touch on the pricing thought that I had earlier, that when you meet the right client, um, money is typically not an issue. It's like, yeah, when can we start? Is it, well, it's going to cost this much. It's like, yeah, when can we start? And so that, like, when everything that doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's really smooth and it feels great. It's like, oh, okay. So and I've had to learn, and I've coached others as well, like um, to ask for more, than I was, to raise my prices and then to get to the point where, yeah, it's not inexpensive, but it's good value, and I can feel confident and stand by that value, and so I can feel confident asking for it. And again, if it's the right client, typically that's not the primary issue. Typically, it's not an issue at all.
Right. Have you ever had those moments where you wondered if you should go back to a corporate job?
Yes, I have. And to be honest, even recently, I've thought about it. I've been at this for 5 years, and um, it's going and it's still growing, and sometimes it feels like the goalposts keep moving, and I feel like I'm just one client away from where I want to be, or what something like that, just not quite there, never quite there. But I think maybe that's the way it's always going to be. It's kind of like mastery. It's almost like Zeno's paradox, where you take half a step, you take a step halfway there, and another step halfway there, but you get closer and closer, but you never quite get there. That said, the stability, income can be lumpy, especially if you don't like business development or if you don't have a system down. I think like you really need a system, and that's something, and I'm a systems person, but I don't feel like my marketing system or my sales and marketing system is yet what it needs to be. And I'm working on that, and you may need to pay some money to do that. And then that's, I'm a very DIY person, but at some point you just have to bite the bullet and pay for it. And I'm looking into some of those options, and I have explored some of those options. But also, um, um, trying to think, I think I lost my train of thought there. In terms of, yeah, the corporate job, I think the stability, income stability is, if that's important to you, being on your own can be a little lumpy and unpredictable. And yeah, there's been times lately, my oldest daughter's going to college this year, and I've been at this for 5 years, and there have been times, even recently, where I feel like I've been working harder than ever for less money than I was making, 5, 7 years ago, and that's just a fact. Um, the upside potential is potentially greater. That gets into questions of scaling. How do you scale yourself, if as a solo practitioner or as a consultant? But I've thought about, yeah, it'd be nice to have benefits, 401k, with matching, and just a steady paycheck. So I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I don't have to go hunt for my next, you know, client, my next meal, so to speak. So yeah, that has come up, and
So
it
what
may
keeps you
still come up.
going? What keeps you, I mean, you've had the
Yeah,
thought, but you don't act on it. You keep putting one foot
yeah,
ahead of the
yeah, yeah.
next one. So what keeps you going?
Yeah, and I've looked in, I've explored some. Sometimes, like, oh, if the right opportunity came, maybe I would consider it. But what keeps me going, I think, is the building towards something. Um, and like I have my own framework now, and it's exciting, and I've shared it with other people who are interested in it, and I have multiple ventures going typically, and that's pros and cons to that, because there's some of them are speculative and it's time without necessarily getting paid. There's some AI stuff I'm doing, an AI platform. Everybody's doing AI, but this architecture I think is really promising. And but people who are interested in my framework and using it, and different communities and so forth. So I think it's the opportunity, to fulfill my purpose, which I think is to amplify, the vision, use the power of business to do good in the world, essentially. And my job is amplifying the power of those businesses, or the agency of those businesses, to make a positive impact in the world. And I do that by, building that engine, that value creation engine and value production engine. So I think, that at this point in my career too, is like, I want to make a human impact, and that, I want to do work that's meaningful and purposeful. Um, People talk a lot about, freedom and having the time and everything like that. Theoretically, that is a something that could come from working for yourself. Right now, I'm not there yet. Right now, like I said, I'm working more than ever and not making as much money as I have in the past, but the potential to sort of own my own destiny, so to speak, and do something that I could do for the next 15 years at least, really for the rest of my career, and as long as I want to, that's mine. And not having to worry about being let go because I'm, over 50 or whatever. Having a certain degree of control. It's not total control, because you have to have clients. But it's yeah, moving from the employee mindset to the business owner's mindset is a big shift. And I think a lot of soloists underestimate that. It's like, oh, now I got to do everything myself. Now I got to sell. Now I have to do marketing. It's you got to think like a business. You're not just selling yourself.
Exactly. And on that, I think that's a good note to end. So that is a wrap on this episode of the Thriving Through podcast. Mark, thank you for being my guest today. I really
You're
enjoyed
welcome.
having you.
It was great talking to you, AJ. Thank you.
What a conversation with Mark. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this episode, it's this. The clients you say no to are just as important as the ones you say yes to. Mark's transformation from taking whatever he could get to commanding premium rates didn't happen overnight, but it started with getting crystal clear on his ideal client profile and having the courage to stick to it and to say no to clients who weren't ideal. Here's what I want you to do after listening to this episode. Take 15 minutes today and write down the characteristics of your ideal client, not just company size or industry. Think about their maturity level, their readiness for change, and whether they have the resources to actually implement your recommendations. Then look at your current client roster and honestly assess how many of them fit that profile. That exercise alone will show you where you need to start making some changes. Mark's story proves that when you're working with the right clients at the right price point, everything becomes easier. The work is more impactful, the relationships are stronger, and yes, the money follows. But it requires the discipline to build systems and the confidence to charge what you're worth. Thanks for listening to the Thriving Through podcast. If this episode helped you think differently about your consulting practice, I'd love for you to share it with another consultant who could benefit. And until then, until next week, keep thriving through.